So good morning and welcome everyone to Energy Cork's Energy and the Circular Economy Conference. Thank you all for joining us today for the first of 3 sessions over the next 3 days focusing on energy-related aspects of the circular economy. These will be 3 90-minute sessions packed full of insights from a wide variety of sectors, so do be sure to tune in each day. I'm Mchugh O'Sullivan, Chair of Energy Cork, and I'm very pleased to represent the membership and steering group of Energy Cork in welcoming you all online this morning. As ever, Energy Cork and the events such as these wouldn't be possible without the ongoing support of Cork County Council and Cork City Council through their respective economic development funds. And we're delighted to have Cork Chamber as the conference sponsor this year, and we thank Cork Chamber for the support in bringing this conference to you today. Delivering our Energy Cork conference is a big undertaking, even online, and the cluster is indebted to our steering group, especially our conference subgroup, including Jackie Quinn, our previous chair, Brian O'Regan, Dennis O'Sullivan, and Dory Talent for all their help in putting this together. We're particularly thankful to our speakers and our moderators who've committed to participate over the next 3 days. We'll meet today's group shortly, and you can check out the full lineup with speaker bios in the conference brochure, which I think will be popped into the chat box there shortly. So just firstly, before we kick off properly, a few items of housekeeping. It should be already done so by default, but please keep your microphone on mute for the duration of the event. We'll have a Q&A session following the presentations. Please use the chat box function to ask any questions you might have. We can't promise to get to every question, but we'll try our best and follow up afterwards if required. Today's event will be recorded and made available in due course afterwards. Our sessions over the next 3 days are focused on turning waste to energy, the circular economy in practice in buildings, transport and heat, and very importantly, the circular economy and the just transition. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussions today and the 2 days ahead, and we sincerely hope you can tune in each day. In Ireland's transition to a net zero carbon economy, in meeting our national and international emission reduction targets, and with the publication of the revised climate action bill yesterday and our commitment through the EU to the Paris Climate Agreement, we must move away from the linear model of using and supplying energy. We need to explore the opportunities to redefine waste as a resource and raw material, moving to decouple economic activity from the waste of energy and materials. The circular economy is a central pillar of the EU Green Deal and central to the action on climate. More and more, our society is embracing a circular economy mindset, recognizing this as a win-win for society, for business, and for the environment. With this in mind, Energy Cork is delighted to be hosting this conference for our members and stakeholders in Cork and those joining us from around the world. And so I'd like to introduce our moderator for today, Professor Gerry Murphy of University College Cork. Professor Murphy serves as Director of the SFI-funded Marai Centre for Energy, Climate and Marine, as Professor Chair of Civil Engineering at UCC, and as Leader of the Biogas Task at the International Energy Agency, Bioenergy. He has authored and edited numerous IEA bioenergy reports. He serves on the advisory board of a number of international organizations, including BBFZ, the German Bioenergy Research Center. He's authored over 160 peer-reviewed papers and is listed in the top 2% of cited academics worldwide. So we're in very good hands for this morning's session. Thank you, Gerry. So handing over to you there, Gerry. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks for this opportunity to be involved in this process. I started a PhD back in 1999 on energy from waste. So this fits in very much with what I've been doing for the last 20 years. And this circular economy approach is really interesting. And I think the name waste is now probably looked at as byproducts or valorization. We have 4 really good speakers from areas that are of critical importance. I mean, we're all aware that yesterday we launched the new climate targets. They're front-loaded. By 2030, we've to reduce emissions by 50%. And we always are concerned with the hard-to-abate sectors. And into this, I would include the food and beverage industry. I mean, Ireland's responsible for, I think it's 12% of infant formula on the planet. We have a huge cheese factory down in the Carbery group. I think it's the largest one in these 2 islands. And the idea of decarbonizing really large gas users who use gas to evaporate water off milk or alcohol off stillage. It's a huge challenge for Ireland. And last night, our Minister for Climate Change talked about electrification of gas use. It's a huge challenge. And I look at Conor Jones and Indaver. And one of the things we do look at going forward is it's not all about electricity. And there's a huge scope for hydrogen. Like if we do have all this offshore wind, at times it would be curtailed and constrained, which could be seen as a waste. But there's huge benefit in converting that into hydrogen. And last night, our minister mentioned burning hydrogen at food and beverage industries, which I don't think I'd be a fan of because it's very, very expensive. I would see hydrogen for mobilization. Irving oil, if we look at transport, we published a paper recently on aviation, on maritime, on haulage. We're not going to electrify planes going to Australia. We're not going to electrify ferries going from here to France. So we do have to look at liquid fuels. We do have to look at hydrogen as a starting point for hydrogenated vegetable oil, for electrofuels. We can react carbon dioxide with hydrogen to make methanol, to make kerosene. And our last presentation of the morning is from Niamh Gillen in Gas Networks Ireland. At this moment in time, in the USA and in Europe, we use twice as much energy from the gas grid as we do from the electricity grid. So gas has a role to play, and if we can decarbonize gas, it will be very, very important. So the first presentation today is from Enda Buckley of the Carbery Group. Enda's Director of Sustainability with over 16 years experience in the sustainability scene. Over the past 6 years, he has worked with the Carbery Group on a series of sustainable initiatives and projects such as Farm Zero C, the Carbery Trees Project, and the Biorefinery Grass Biorefinery Project. Prior to his time at Carbery, Enda worked in his own consultancy, Sustainable Solutions, tutored at DCU, worked as the Sustainable Transport Policy Officer for the Irish Environmental Network, and was Sustainability Director at the National Newspapers of Ireland. Enda is a science graduate of NUI Galway with a HDip in Applied Science Microbiology, and also holds an MSc in the Management of Sustainable Development through Dublin City University. Over to you, Enda. Really looking forward to this presentation.
Thanks very much, Jerry, and thanks to Energy Cork for the invite as well. So look, I'll get straight into it. You can see my screen there, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, very good. So just two very brief slides on Carbery, I guess. So the first, I guess, is just the makeup of the group. So we're headquartered down in Ballyneen in West Cork. We're owned by 4 West Cork co-ops. We've 1,207 milk suppliers spread all over West Cork. I suppose we're a leading manufacturer really in kind of 3 areas: nutritional ingredients, flavors through our synergy business, and cheese. You mentioned it, Jerry. The biggest cheddar cheese plant in the UK and Ireland is in Carbery. Made about 60,000 tons of cheese last year. Dubliner cheese will be one of our flagship products. So founded 56 years ago by the West Cork co-ops. Sales in 2019 of 434 million. Our report will be out in the next week. That increased by about 25 million last year. And we're selling in over 50 international markets. So just a brief one here, I guess, on the locations. And again, I'm not going to dwell on this too long, but I suppose those kind of global locations really are our synergy flavors business. As you can see, in the US, Brazil, UK, Italy, and Thailand, and those with international representations and through Corby and the like globally as well. And we have a joint venture with Barbers near Bristol in the UK also. So I suppose to get into the real detail, I'm just going to show this graphic first. This is quite simplistic, but it gives you a feel, I guess, for the process at the plant in Ballyneen. So again, I suppose milk comes into the plant. Firstly, what happens is you take off the cream, and that goes to Kerrygold Park to make butter, and you use the curd to make cheese. And approximately 10% of the volume goes to cheese making. The remaining 90 goes to is whey. And what happens then is you strip all of the proteins out of the whey through ultrafiltration, nanofiltration, etc. and you make whey protein ingredients, and you're left then with a stream which is called whey permeate. And I'll get into this in more detail in the following slide, but basically back in the 70s, Carbery basically propagated the yeast that when worked with the lactose. So what's in the whey permeate basically is water. It's about 95% water, 5% lactose with some trace minerals. And it's effectively, it's a waste stream, it's a biodegradable waste. So again, Carbery makes bioethanol from the whey permeate. It doesn't stop there. The stillage stream then from the alcohol plant, that goes to biogas production, which powers about 9% of Carbery's steam requirements. Doesn't stop there. I suppose the resultant effluent streams then go to our wastewater treatment plant, where we produce an organic fertilizer. This is actually certified organic. It's a really, really good biostimulant, and that's then spread, used by farmers locally to fertilize their fields, and the process starts again. So it's very circular. It gives you a feel, I guess, for the process in Carbery. So just a bit more detail on the bioethanol production. So like I mentioned, this was initiated back in 1978, way back. The process, which is known as the Carbery process, was later adopted in New Zealand and California and other places in Europe as well. The plant produces about 12 million litres per annum. And I suppose in recent years, we've kind of taken a different direction. We managed to obtain ISSC certification, which is the International Sustainability and Carbon Cert license for the whey-derived bioethanol. And we were granted a biofuel account with the Biofuel Obligation Scheme. So again, very closely after that, we were able to get double cert by NORA, which is the National Oil Reserves Agency. And they identified whey permeate as a biodegradable waste, and we were able to obtain 2 BOS certs per litre on the back of that. So look, since early 2018, our bioethanol has been going to fuel companies, the likes of Niamh's Irving, as a biofuel. And I suppose there's a significant greenhouse gas emission saving. So bioethanol is the biofuel for petrol, and Carbery's bioethanol is 86% less carbon intensive than petrol. And again, in an Irish context, that equates to about 16,321 tons of CO2 compared to standard petrol. So it's a very sustainable biofuel. Moving on to just a little bit of info, I suppose, on the biogas. So the original anaerobic digestion plant was operational in Carbery since 1982. Led to believe that was the first kind of commercial scale AD plant in Ireland. That was later upgraded to a PAX system back in the late 90s. You can see it there on the left. That's a picture of the 2 PAX bioreactors that we have in Carbery. They generate about 7,300 megawatts of heat annually at Carbery. So again, about 9% of our steam requirements on site. And I suppose the other thing I'd just say on AD, I suppose, look, we've commenced and we're coming to the final stages of a feasibility for AD for West Cork. We were fortunate to get innovation funding from GNI for that, which covers the lion's share of that. And it was the other thing I just mentioned is that we're also part of a project called Project Clover, which is aiming at, I suppose, really trying to establish a biomethane industry in Ireland, along with the likes of GNI and RGFI, etc. You touched on it, Jerry. Our sector really, if we're going to decarbonize, we really need biomethane, and we'd strongly be arguing for that. Just moving on, and this is kind of linked as well to the AD piece. So what you're looking at there is a grass biorefinery. This model was developed by a company called Grassa, who were one of the partners in a project called Biorefinery Glass, which was led by Mchugh and James Gaffey. So this is a grass biorefinery. You present cut grass to it, and it basically develops 4 co-products from the process. So one is press cake, and you can see that it looks like lawn cuttings in the very foreground. That's what the press cake is. So the grass is presented, it's got a joint extruder and press as part of the process, and it essentially squeezes all the liquid and moisture out of the grass. So you're left with the press cake, you ensoil that. That's a winter feed like silage for your cows or cattle or whatever. You then, the other resultant stream then is a green juice, press juice, and there's 3 different co-products within the press juice. So one is a protein concentrate. It's ideal for monogastrics, and as part of this project, it was fed to pigs with very good results. Basically a soy replacement. The next part is the FOS, fructooligosaccharides, which is a prebiotic that can also be mined from pressed juice. And we, it was from this project we were able to mine, significant volumes of FOS. And the last part, which is relevant to AD, is the grass whey. And the grass whey can either be a biostimulant. And again, as part of the project, we showed that it actually has similar qualities to a farmer's slurry. It is similar biostimulant qualities. But the other piece, which is very interesting, and I suppose this is where we'd like to develop this further, is we actually got it tested for biomethane potential. And it came back with really encouraging results. Very low retention times, and looks like an ideal feedstock for AD systems. And we think this system is quite complementary with an AD because, for example, the excess heat from the AD could be used to actually dry the protein from this. And obviously, this is quite complementary because there's a feedstock coming from it for the AD. So look, just want to keep an eye on, but I think it's very relevant to the topic of AD. The last piece I'm going to mention, guys, is a project that we initiated nearly 2 years ago now. It's called Farm Zero C. So basically, we're developing a climate neutral dairy farm at Shannock, which is owned by the West Cork Co-ops just outside Bandon. We initially made an application under SFI, under the Zero Emissions Challenge. Jerry, you'll be familiar with this one as well. So you can see the partners there. So Biorbic are leading the SFI call. We've also made a submission to the Farm to Fork Horizon 2020, and we're leading that one ourselves. So it's an exciting project. I guess they're our partners. And just to give you, I suppose, a feel for, I guess, some of the work that we have been doing. And so in the last year, I suppose, we've looked at seaweed additives, kind of mixed results, to be fair. We're getting anything from 0, and there was an issue with basically the bioactive not being present all the way up to 40%. So, and there's recent work from the States showing you can get up to 80% methane reduction from seaweed additives. So it's a very exciting space. We're working with chemical amendments for slurry, which basically stabilizes slurry and ensure that there's no emissions from the slurry. We've done a lot of work in carbon, basically sampled the whole farm paddocks for carbon. So I suppose the initial piece is the baseline, to obtain a baseline, but we've also worked with a company called Carbon Space and looked at satellite spectrometry, and basically that work is showing that we actually might have more carbon being sequestered. And again, look, we're going to validate that through the work we're doing on the ground. We planted multi-species swards. They typically need 70% less fertilizer than a typical kind of ryegrass sward. We're using protected urea. So 90% of the nitrogen output last year was through protected urea, which has got significant ammonia emissions impacts compared to calcium ammonium nitrate or other fertilizers farmers would use. And to date, we've seen no impact on milk yield on that. We've done extensive. We've got a windmill on the farm, so we've done solar modelling. We've installed smart meters again to kind of capture all of the energy savings we could look at. We've done extensive biodiversity mapping on the farm. So we had a student from Trinity, Keen White, spent 2 months in the farm last year looking at all the habitats, very extensive modelling, and we're now looking to capture that in an app as well, where maybe farmers can actually map their own biodiversity. And the last part then is LCA, which is the whole science underpinning this. So life cycle analysis, again, extensive modelling. The guy in the picture there is Alejandro Vergara. He's an Ecuadorian LCA expert. He's been really, really good for the project. And we're also looking at business cases because whatever we're doing here, we want to see this replicated throughout dairy farms. So that just gives you a feel for the various interventions. A feel here, I guess, for the roadmap. So we think we can achieve this by 2026, 2027. We're looking at 3 phases. So the farm is already a good bit ahead of the national. So the national average is about 1.12 kg of CO2. We know the Shannock farm is down to 0.85. And you can see, and again, this is quite simplistic, but it gives you a feel for the interventions that we're looking at to bring this farm to climate neutral. And a big one, of course, will be enteric fermentation, but you can see other ones there like manure storage we're looking at protein concentrate in the feed, soil carbon sequestration. Again, there's very encouraging trends there. And the grass biorefinery is going to have an impact. That's kind of phase 3. And we see that basically, you can see there on to the right-hand side of that graphic, that would basically offset the final remnants really of the pieces that will bring us to climate neutrality. So just to sum up, I guess we feel that the farm and this project is placing the farm at the center of the solution. I suppose we built the solution foundation, and we believe it can be rapidly rolled out to farmers in coming years. I think it's got the, definitely this could transform agriculture, certainly dairying, and provide a bright future for farmers in rural communities. It'll certainly help Ireland to meet and exceed EU targets. We saw the revised climate bill last night. This thing, can't come fast enough, really. And we believe it can be a beacon for sustainable agriculture. And that's my bit, Jerry.
Thank you very much, and a fabulous presentation. Great breadth. The circular economy at the facility is excellent, and that project sounds very, very interesting. The Farm Zero. Great to measure these values. So we'll go straight on. Thank you, and we'll go straight on to our next presentation, which is from Conor Jones of Indaver. Conor graduated from UCD in 1996 with a degree in chemical engineering and joined Indaver in 1999. He has 20 years experience in the development of waste energy plants in Ireland and the UK, was actively involved in the development of the Carnstown waste energy facility in County Meath, currently working on the construction of 2 waste energy projects in the UK with Indaver, and is exploring how to best utilize energy generated from these plants with a particular focus on hydrogen and district heating. Conor, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jerry. I'll just get this screen share up if I can. Okay, can you see that, Jerry?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, great. So morning, everyone, and great to see such a big turnout at the event. Big thanks to Energy Cork and Kieran and Michelle for the opportunity to speak. So thanks a million for that. And I hope that you'll find the slides that I'm presenting interesting, or at least they'll spark some discussion and debate. So a little bit about Indaver as a company. I suppose we're a European company leading in waste management, and we operate a variety of treatment installations, from waste to energy plants to anaerobic digesters and materials recovery facilities in several countries in Europe. And I suppose the circular economy has always been a key and central to our waste management approach. And I guess the graphic just shows Indaver as the gatekeeper there, where priority is given to material recovery and reuse. Where recovery and reuse isn't possible, we recover energy. And I suppose in the context of waste to energy, not only is waste diverted away from landfill, but we also recover valuable renewable energy in the process, and metals, and also have the potential to recover other materials from bottom ashes for reuse in road building, etc. So what are we going to cover today? I guess it's just a quick whistle-stop tour of the existing environment for the methods for reusing energy from the waste to energy process, and that's primarily electricity production and combined heat and power. And looking at innovations and how this is evolving through the likes of hydrogen production and power to chemicals or sustainable chemical production. So starting with waste to energy and electricity production, this is our facility in Meath, where we generate about 20 megawatts of electricity, and we export 17 megawatts to the grid. 50% of that is renewable, and I suppose it's enough electricity to power a small town of 20 to 30,000 people. So small in the overall context, I guess, but still a significant contributor. But I guess the fly in the ointment here is, and this is a common problem in Ireland certainly, is that the levels of curtailment have been rising since the plant went into operation in 2010. So last year we were curtailed or switched off the electricity grid for about 1,000 hours, which is a very significant proportion of our energy production. And effectively that energy is wasted and it's lost. But we'll come back to how we're dealing with that later. So moving on, maybe then to combined heat and power or district heating networks. This is a project we're working on in Aberdeen with the local authority there. So the development of the district heating network here was driven by the local authority. It's using hot water, and they're building the district heating network for the local community. And very simply, we provide 2 small heat exchangers on our site to heat the water for that system to be distributed to the local community. So this was done by the local authority on the back of very strong policy drivers in Scotland. So there's a very strong focus on the use of district heating networks coupled with plants such as this. And this plant will go into operation late next year and has the potential for about 10 megawatts of heat for distribution to that local network. But I guess the other thing with district heating networks is that it's not always possible. Either the policy drivers aren't there or the heat users aren't there. So in the context of our Meath plant, we don't have a high density for heat usage in the vicinity of the plant or industrial users that we could provide a steam network to. So it's not always possible, but it is one of the most efficient ways to use the energy generated from a waste to energy plant. So moving on to this project, project we did in the Port of Antwerp called Project Ecluse was commissioned in 2018. And this was an industry-driven project where we've got a high concentration of energy-intensive industries in the Port of Antwerp that had their own steam boilers using fossil fuels, and effectively by building a 6-kilometer pipeline from our plant, which is producing 250 megawatts of steam, we were able to distribute 160 megawatts of that steam to them at high pressure for them to use in their own plants, replacing fossil fuel usage in their own steam boilers in those plants, and saving on average 100,000 tons of CO2 emissions per annum. So a very good example of how it can be done in industrial clusters with steam, as opposed to just the traditional district heating or hot water networks that we showed for Aberdeen. So moving on to the innovations, I suppose this is the exciting stuff for everyone, and hydrogen is a big buzzword these days. But I guess in the context of our plant in Meath, we've been searching for several years for ways to avoid the wastage of that electricity. It's an awful waste. It's about 10 gigawatts of electricity each year. So that bothered us greatly as a company, and we were searching for ways to utilize that wasted energy. And I guess that search led us to hydrogen. We lodged a planning application last year for this project with An Bord Pleanála, and we're hoping to get a decision in Q4 this year. But I suppose the project itself, it's a 10 megawatt electrolyzer unit in 4 modules. So there's a basic schematic of it here shown on the screen, the 4 modules, producing hydrogen from the old lab method that you're probably all familiar with, that you did in secondary school, a little battery hooked up to 2 electrodes in water and splitting the water into its 2 component parts, hydrogen and oxygen. And this is just doing that on an industrial scale in 2.5 megawatt units. But this project would have the capability of producing 160 tons per annum of hydrogen, based on just only that curtailed power of 1,000 hours per annum, but it could be run for longer. So why hydrogen? I mean, we looked at lots of options. We looked at batteries, we looked at flywheels, we looked at lots of different alternatives, but really we kept coming back to hydrogen. And why? First of all, it's a very simple process. The technology is well established. It uses renewable energy to produce a clean fuel, which has become so important, obviously, these days. And it also provides flexibility in routes to market for that fuel, albeit that those markets are only evolving now. We're really only at the beginning, and we've been talking to GNI about mixes and blending into the natural gas network. And there's a couple of pilot projects on the island at the moment. Hydrogen Mobility Ireland have one in cooperation with Dublin Bus, where they've purchased some hydrogen fuel buses that are powered by hydrogen. So I guess it's clean in that you're splitting water into a fuel, which is hydrogen. And then when you're using the hydrogen, you're converting that hydrogen back into water. So it's a very nice closed loop in that context. And I guess it's an exciting area for us. This will be our first hydrogen project in the Indaver group, and the first of this scale that we're aware of in the country at the moment. So what's after that? I guess another further development of this type of innovation would be combining hydrogen production with carbon capture and usage, so CCU. So the schematic there on the screen shows the process using renewable energy to split water into hydrogen, and then capturing the flue gases from a power plant or from a waste energy plant, capturing that carbon and synthesizing methanol or ethanol from that to make a sustainable chemical. This pilot project we're involved in here, again, it's in the port of Antwerp, and we're collaborating with several other industry partners to produce about 4,000 or 8,000 tons of methanol per annum as a demonstration project. So that project is starting this year, will probably be operational next year, but we'll be keen to watch that one to see its success in order to develop larger scale plants on the back of it. But that's a really interesting one, and particularly in the context of the Port of Antwerp, where something like methanol or ethanol are intensively used as precursors for chemical manufacture. It's very interesting in there in the port, in the circular economy space. So just to sum up, I guess, going back to the start, the traditional methods of using energy from the waste energy process are still valid, and there's still a role for electricity production and for CHP. CHP is via district heating networks or steam networks is still the most efficient way to do it, but not always possible depending on the location of the plant concerned. But I think future plants for sure will have to be more innovative where CHP is not an option. I think that's really where hydrogen or combining that with carbon capture and use will become more important in the future. And thanks for listening. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Conor. A fabulous presentation. And I love the expansion into hydrogen and carbon capture and into liquid transport fuels, because we're not going to get rid of liquid transport fuels. And I do think a lot of utilities and developers need to look at the fact we're going to need liquid fuels. And I think this leads us on very much to Niamh in Irving Oil. So Niamh is working in the area of strategic development with Irving Oil, based in Whitegate Refinery, Cork. Over 20 years experience in the oil industry with a number of varying roles: process optimization, process plant design, commissioning, project management, capital planning. Her current area of focus is sustainable energy, concentrating on decarbonization options within the refining sector. Her remit covers areas such as renewable fuel production from waste, green hydrogen production and carbon capture, utilization and storage. She holds a bachelor's degree in chemical engineering from UCD. Over to you, Niamh.
Thanks very much, Jerry, and thanks to Kieran and Michelle from Energy Cork for the opportunity to present today. And as Jerry said, my role within Irving is predominantly working in the area of sustainable development for the refinery. And that's really looking at what the refinery of the future will look like against a backdrop of ambitious climate targets for our industry and also for the products that we produce. So we're really very much looking at the role that we play as a renewable energy provider for Ireland and for further afield. So with that, there we go. So with that, just a little bit of background about the refinery itself. We're the only oil refinery in Ireland, and with that we supply about 40% of Ireland's transport fuels. We supply a suite of products: propane, butane, kerosene and home heating oil, and also then, as I say, transport fuels such as petrol and diesel for the Irish market. We're located in East Cork in Whitegate. So I suppose this just gives you an overview of Cork Harbour. And you can see there we're located in a beautiful area in Ireland. And you have our jetty facility there and our crude storage tankage in the picture there stretching out into Cork Harbour. While Whitegate is quite a small village in East Cork, it has a very strategic role to play in the energy sector, because about a third of Ireland's energy products actually come from the Whitegate area. You can see in this picture here in the foreground, you have a BGE power plant adjacent to the refinery. And then in the background there, you also have the Ahada ESB generating station. So as I say, between the two power plants and the refinery itself, we produce about a third of Ireland's energy requirements. So it's a kind of a national energy park, or an energy hub, as we like to refer to it here in East Cork. So looking a little bit closer at the refinery itself, I suppose this just gives you an idea of our footprint and just indicates the processing units that we have at the refinery for producing the various products that we produce, and the storage facilities that we have here for storage of our products, through from our gaseous products down to our liquid petrol and diesel products. So just to set the scene really in terms of looking at what the refining sector is doing in relation to renewable fuels, and I thought I'd just set the scene from a legislative perspective and look at what the driving force is behind renewable fuel production and what the future will look like. Most of you will be very familiar with the Renewable Energy Directive, the European legislation that covers the direction that Europe want to go in relation to renewable energy share within the energy sector. The European Commission set a target of 20% for 2020, and Europe as a whole it met this target. In fact, they exceeded this target as a whole. However, there were a few member states that didn't quite meet their target, Ireland being one of them. Ireland was set a target of 16% as our national renewable energy target, and we achieved 12% of that target. So I suppose it just sets the scene that we had ambitious targets set for 2020. We didn't quite get there, so there's more to be done, and all sectors will need to contribute because obviously, as we heard yesterday from Minister Ryan, our targets and our ambitions for 2030 are more ambitious. And so it just there's still a lot done, but a lot more to be done. Within that 16% renewable energy target, it's divided between three sectors: electricity, transport, and heat and cooling, which is really the building sector. And the area, I suppose, that I'm focusing on is really the transport sector target, because, and this is a mandated target of 10%. So 10% of the energy that's on the market must come from a renewable source. So Ireland achieved 8.9% versus the 10% target for 2020. So I'll just go on to just show you how we achieved 8.9% for that against that target. The other directive then that maybe many would not be too familiar with is the Fuels Quality Directive. And the Fuels Quality Directive is a directive that mandates fuel suppliers within the European Union to achieve a 6% greenhouse gas reduction on the transport fuels that they put on the market. Again, this was a target for 2020, but has obviously rolled over also as a target for 2030 and beyond. Europe as a whole did not achieve this target by 2020. It fell slightly short of it, achieving just over 4%. Ireland hasn't released the final numbers, but it looks like we will achieve about 3.4% against this Fuels Quality Directive. So as I say, a lot more to be done in the area of increasing renewable content of our fuels in the transport sector. So that brings me on to what 2030 looks like. And the Renewable Energy Directive was recast in 2018, and we speak about RED 2. And RED 2, where Ireland had a 16% national renewable energy target, that has been increased to 24%, with the mandated target for transport set at 14%. This Renewable Energy Directive will be transposed into Irish legislation mid of this year, June 2021. But really, the ink will be barely dry on the page when we're actually going to start talking and looking at what RED 3 looks like. And that's really because no sooner than the European Commission had agreed the terms of RED 2, they issued the European Green Deal in 2019, which set more ambitious targets than what RED 2 committed to. So that's where the European Commission has committed to a 55% greenhouse gas reduction rather than the original 40% that they had, put forward. So with that in mind, the Renewable Energy Directive RED 2 doesn't go far enough at 24% and a 14% target for transport. It will need to be revised upwards. And we'll be looking at a renewable energy target closer to 32%, with an increased mandate then in the transport sector. So again, very much just setting the scene that it's going to be more and more renewable in the required in the renewable in the transport sector. And that ties in with the climate action bill that we saw launched by the government yesterday. And as Jerry alluded to in the beginning, it's very much front loaded with a 51% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030. So very ambitious, and means that there needs to be a lot done within the transport sector, given that from an energy perspective, transport actually contributes the most energy from it within the energy sector. So I suppose you're wondering how has the transport sector started to decarbonise and work towards the goal of ultimately decarbonising by 2050. I suppose Enda mentioned the Biofuel Obligation Scheme. The government introduced the Biofuel Obligation Scheme in 2010. And so the transport sector has been very active in increasing renewable content of the fuels that are sold nationally since 2010. And you can see there on the graph, the black line there indicates the biofuel obligation, which is obligated on all fuel suppliers within the European Union. So within Ireland, anybody who's a fuel supplier supplying fuel to the Irish market must ensure that in 2010, there was a 4% obligation, and that has steadily increased to an 11% obligation currently. So this basically means that 11% of the transport fuels that's put on the market must be from a renewable origin. So how do we achieve that? We achieve that by blending a renewable biodiesel into the diesel pool. So that's called FAME, which stands for fatty acid methyl ester. So essentially what it is, it's a biodiesel produced from waste-based feedstocks. And in Ireland, we're quite lucky that we have a significant agricultural sector, so therefore, and a big meat processing sector. So we produce quite a lot of tallow, which is an animal fat, which can be used for the production of biodiesel. And in Ireland, 100% of the biodiesel that's blended into our diesel product is waste based. It's from used cooking oil from the catering industry and from tallow from the meat industry. One thing to, I suppose, note is that Ireland is quite different to a lot of other member states in terms of the split between diesel and petrol. In a lot of other member states, you have much more of a 50-50 split between diesel and petrol. But in Ireland, you can see here on the graph, the green line there and bubbles represent diesel. So Ireland is very much a 80-20 diesel petrol split. And so we need to concentrate our efforts very much on how we decarbonize diesel. Obviously, every drop of renewable helps. And so it is key that we also look at decarbonizing the petrol. But from Ireland's perspective, we get a lot more bang for your buck, if you like, in decarbonizing the diesel pool, given the 80-20 split between diesel and petrol. The biofuel obligation, as I say, is currently set at 11%. It's due to increase to roughly around 13% in 2022. And we will see an upward trajectory out, probably with increases in the biofuel obligation every 2 years between now and 2030 and beyond. It's worthwhile mentioning that the 8.9% achieved versus the 10% target was achieved entirely by the biofuel obligation scheme. There was probably only about 0.1% contributed by the by electric vehicles. Obviously, this is going to increase as we all start to look at electrifying the passenger vehicles. And we do feel that out towards 2030, 2035, we will see a significant increase in electric vehicles as we move out towards 2030, 2035. But obviously we will, and we see renewable diesel very much playing a role as a transition fuel as we are transitioning from on the passenger vehicle side from liquid fuels over to electrification of the car fleet. However, obviously on the heavy goods vehicle side, aviation and marine, we very much will rely on liquid biofuels. So I think there's still quite a long life left in liquid biofuels going forward. So renewable, so one key, I suppose, point to mention on the blending of FAME, there is a limit of 7% FAME that can be blended into diesel, and this is set by the car manufacturers. The properties of biodiesel doesn't lend itself to be blended easily at higher levels than the 7%, although there are countries that will start to look at introducing a B10 grade, so a 10% FAME blending. Currently, the majority of the European Union are operating on a 7% blend of FAME. So in order for us to push through and introduce more renewable into diesel, we need to introduce a renewable diesel. And I suppose you're just wondering what exactly is renewable diesel. It can be quite confusing to differentiate between the different terms of biodiesel and renewable diesel. Biodiesel is typically FAME and what I've referred to, and it's what we call a conventional biofuel. And renewable diesel is also used, you might have heard the name HVO. It's very often referred to as HVO, which is quite a poor name for it nowadays. It's hydrotreated vegetable oil, and it really stems because originally when it started to be manufactured, it was traditionally produced from vegetable oils, so from your soy oil, rape, palm oils. That's really no longer the case nowadays, and more renewable diesel is now being produced from waste and residue fat fractions from animal fats. So in Ireland, renewable diesel will be produced from indigenous waste such as used cooking oil and tallow. Whereas in Scandinavia, they use waste such as tall oil and waste from the forestry industry. There's quite a lot of work going on in developing future wastes, and so you will see a lot more work in the space looking at more advanced wastes like algae and municipal wastes. One of the key benefits of renewable diesel is that it's indistinguishable from diesel fossil fuel. So unlike the traditional conventional biodiesel, there is no blending limits. So this can be added to as a drop-in fuel to your fossil diesel and can be ran at any percentages in your cars. It has some superior properties to it, so higher heating value, so therefore leading to an improved efficiency and performance. And as I say, it's manufactured in a conventional refinery process, so it's very mature technology. So it isn't a technology that needs further R&D or further research. It's in conventional technology. So from a Whitegate perspective, the likes of used cooking oil or tallow can be co-processed along with fossil diesel in a hydrotreater unit, can be made as a renewable diesel. FAME can be added, so biodiesel at 7% can be added to this and then sold on the forecourts, therefore increasing the renewable content upwards of the diesel that's sold on the forecourts. So just in terms of benefits for renewable diesel versus fossil diesel, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions by up to 90%. So when you're using used cooking oil or tallow as a feedstock, you can exceed 90% greenhouse gas emission reductions. So it's really a great fuel from a CO2 perspective. As I say, there is no blend limit. It can be used as a drop-in fuel, so we can make blends of 10%, 20%, 30%, or we can indeed look at running 100% renewable diesel. And you'll find that a lot of the freight hauliers and the heavy goods vehicles are really looking at this as an option for them to convert their existing fleet of Scania and DAF and Volvo trucks over to run on a 100% renewable diesel rather than having to change technology. So that just plays into being able to use existing infrastructure. So the existing road transport and forecourt infrastructure can be used to for sale of this product.
Niamh,
again,
may I ask you to finish up soon?
Perfect. Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Again, indigenous waste feedstocks can be used, such as the tallow and used cooking oil, and the technology is mature. So finally, just to look at what it means in terms of relative greenhouse gas emission intensity, I suppose this is just a useful slide to just indicate your typical new diesel car in the market operates with about 113 grams of CO2 per kilometre. And then as you can see, as you vary 20% renewable, you can look at petrol hybrids. And when you look at those versus, say, your typical EV, so obviously your electric vehicle in itself is a zero emission vehicle, but clearly you need to look at the life cycle of the emissions, and that is operating with a grid average from 2020 of about 50 grams of CO2 per kilometre. And then again, if you were to look at a 100% renewable diesel, you would be down around 12 grams of CO2 per kilometre. So all in all, a pretty good story in terms of liquid renewable fuels for the future. So that wraps me up, Jerry, in what we're doing in the transport sector.
Thank you very, very much, Niamh. A fascinating presentation. We'll have all the questions at the end because I know there's topics which are greatly interesting. We've one more presentation. It's from Niamh Gillen from Gas Networks Ireland. Niamh is an innovation engineer at GNI. She holds a degree in geology and petroleum geology and is currently undertaking an MSc in project management in UCC. Niamh's experience has been primarily in the area of assessing carbon capture, storage, and biomethane as decarbonisation technologies for the gas network. Her current work is continuing to develop the business case for biomethane from agricultural sources in Ireland. Over to you, Niamh.
Thanks, Jerry. And thank you to Michelle and Kieran as well for giving us the opportunity to speak today. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you today about how GNI will be supporting turn waste to energy initiatives. So, trying to move on. All right. So why is it important that Gas Networks supports, excuse me, turn waste to energy initiatives? And one of the main reasons is climate change. It is the greatest global challenge that we are facing right now. And if we do not address it, there will be repercussions for this generation and for generations to come. And in doing this, one step that has been taken is to move away from fossil fuels as an energy source. And fantastic work has been done here in Ireland, particularly around renewable electricity. But as Jerry mentioned earlier, and Niamh alluded to, is that gas is still playing a very critical role in our energy mix. And it currently accounts for 1/3 of our total energy sources. So decarbonised solutions are going to be needed to meet that demand. So Gas Networks Ireland is committed to decarbonising its gas network in line with Irish and EU policy, while continuing to deliver a safe, reliable and flexible energy source for our customers. So one technology in trying to achieve this is renewable gas in the form of biomethane. And I suppose when we look at the topic today, biomethane is a true representation of turning waste to energy. And we are very much already in a unique position to, I suppose, tap into this opportunity, as the European Commission report has highlighted that Ireland has the highest potential biogas production per capita within the EU by 2030. So we're in a nice starting point to begin. So I'm sure most people are familiar with the process, but I'll just quickly run through it. So organic biodegradable material is fed into an anaerobic digestion facility. This material then breaks down in an oxygen-free environment known as anaerobic. This breakdown occurs naturally as material decomposes and biogas is produced, and this biogas is captured within the facility. The next step, though, for biomethane is the upgrading and cleaning of that biogas to biomethane. And that biomethane is a direct substitute for natural gas. So that means it's compatible within our gas grid. So you have a carbon neutral renewable gas. And what that means is that the emissions that are created when the fuel is eventually burned have already been accounted for and offset through emissions avoided in the production process. So the gas is then available to be transported for injection into our network. And ultimately what you have at the end is a renewable fuel that requires no change in infrastructure or no amendments to operations for our end user. So as solutions go, it's a very undisruptive solution for decarbonisation. And aside from the energy aspect, there's other wider benefits that have been long attributed to the renewable gas story. And those benefits are mainly seen within the agricultural sector. So digestate is a byproduct of the AD process. And the digestate is a high nutrient value product with up to 70% less methane emissions than a slurry. And it can in turn act as a biofertilizer, so returning back to the farmer and back to the land. Other benefits that have been noted with digestate is that it's more readily absorbed. There's also been evidence that there's been decreased nitrogen leaching in comparison to slurry. And also German farmers who have made the switch from chemical fertilizers to digestate have also shown an increase in 24% in their yields. The farm to fork strategy as well, which kind of feeds into the European Green Deal, which has already been noted as kind of the flagship initiative within Europe for driving climate change, has set a target for a reduction of 20% chemical fertilizers. So digestate will play a key role in reaching that target. But furthermore, digestate will help in restoring soil health, which is a major topic at the moment, especially for our farmers. And it will do that by increasing soil organic content, by helping the process of soil carbon sequestration, but by furthermore from reducing that reliance that our soils currently have on chemical fertilizer. Finally, by having a biomethane industry here in Ireland, we can offer more opportunities to farmers, and I suppose there'll be stimulus for the rural economy as well through diversified income and through a new industry. And also our food production sector here in Ireland, which is a vital source of employment and of revenue, who also desperately need biomethane, I think as Enda alluded to earlier for their operations. Due to their agricultural supply chain, they can further harness some of these benefits too, to remain competitive with their products on an international market. So in order for this to be realised, G&I's role is to support the producers in getting every unit of gas they produce onto the grid. And in doing that, we have two options. So the first option is a direct connection. And that is where a producer is close enough to the existing infrastructure that exists here today. And if it's economically feasible, we can extend the network via pipeline to their facility for direct connection. But the reality is that an awful lot of our farming enterprises and farming clusters are in rural areas. And in a lot of cases, it would not be economically viable to extend the network. So we introduced a concept of the central grid injection facility, such as our Project Graze up in Mitchellstown. So what that does is allow biomethane to be collected from roughly a 50-kilometre radius. So a truck would essentially go to a producer, take the gas away, bring it to this facility for injection. So therefore, the opportunity will be there for a lot more farmers than what would exist with direct connection alone. So there are those two options. And by having this biomethane transporting throughout our network, it will offer a key solution for those hard to decarbonise sectors, such as heat, industry and transport. As we continue to support the development of a biomethane industry here in Ireland, there are some key concerns that I suppose keep reappearing and they need to be addressed. And one of those concerns is the sustainability of agri-AD. And would the introduction of anaerobic digestion here in Ireland upset the balance that exists in our current agricultural system? So with that in mind, we commissioned a report with the expertise of Devonish Nutrition and their research farm in Dowd, County Meath, supported by KPMG Sustainable Futures. And on this research farm, they are developing real data, supported also by Teagasc data on sustainable practices here in Ireland. And one of the things I suppose that sparked our interest, and I know Enda mentioned it earlier too, is the impact of reseeding with multi-species spores. And the reason this is sparking our interest is it's helping us to alleviate concerns around the food versus fuel concern that is widely there amongst stakeholders when it comes to anaerobic digestion. So the concern is there that in times of challenging weather conditions such as drought, which hasn't been uncommon in the last couple of years, but probably won't be uncommon out of the future either, given the acceleration of climate change, is that the food will be diverted from the animal towards the AD facility. So the multi-species spores have shown that they are more climate resilient than your traditional monocrop ryegrass, that there is a decreased need for chemical fertilizer. They also have increased yields, nearly twice as much can be grown, so more productive. And finally, as well, supported by Teagasc data, is that they have a higher biogas yield when used as a feedstock in an anaerobic digestion facility also. So we are extremely hopeful that this report, when published, will help to alleviate a lot of the concerns and help key stakeholders, I suppose, drive towards the acceptance of an AD industry here in Ireland. And finally, I just want to point to this project Biofuel. So we are lucky through our innovation fund in gas networks to be able to support other projects. And this one, Biofuel, which is led by University of Limerick, is proposing a zero waste biorefinery utilising willow as a feedstock. And it's looking at the properties of willow in the sense of medicinal, packaging, fertiliser and energy potential of willow as a crop, and whether it has a higher application on bioeconomic and circular applications as well. And a GNI element of this is assessing the willow bark pulp waste residue as a feedstock for anaerobic digestion. But I suppose, aside from all the fantastic things that this project will deliver, what I like to point to is the large level of partners that are involved in this project. And I think for me, it highlights, in order to achieve circular economy initiatives, a high level of collaboration is needed. And similarly, as we try to tackle climate change and as we try to meet our ambitious targets, that integration and collaboration is also going to be needed going forward. And there isn't any one solution that is going to solve or meet the targets that we have set for ourselves as a country, but it is fantastic whenever technology like biomethane comes along and it has the opportunity to address problems across various sectors. So I just think collaboration is key. So finally, I hope your takeaway from this is that Ireland has a unique opportunity to produce biomethane, that biomethane is a carbon neutral renewable fuel, and it will help to go towards decarbonising some of the hardest to decarbonise sectors here in Ireland, including agriculture. And collaboration is key to achieving circular economy initiatives. So that's for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Niamh. I really enjoyed that presentation, and I'm involved in the Biofuel project, so it's good to give it a little bit of advertisement. One thing I find about these presentations, it fits into the science of the leftovers and industrial ecology, and I do like that circular Russian doll type system of picking up layers and finding other elements. I'm going to pass you over for a quick 2-minute conversation with Thomas Mchugh. And Thomas is going to talk about a report written by Cork Chamber on anaerobic digestion.
Thanks very much, Jerry. I think it's really interesting to just come in straight after Niamh, because effectively what we did last year was to work with the Cooperative Centre in UCC to produce a multi-stakeholder report, really looking at anaerobic digestion. I suppose anaerobic digestion, you know, is challenged in terms of its storytelling ability. It's much more complex, and there's no two solutions the same than for example something like wind energy or other stories that are comparably easy to tell. And what we really wanted to do is just to raise awareness in government, raise awareness in stakeholders, and raise awareness in the business community about the huge potential that's there. You know, the nice thing about AD is it is circular, and it can help to, you know, reduce carbon, you know, from the agricultural setting, you know, as so well articulated by Enda earlier. But it also helps to create, you know, a more stable, you know, economic environment in potentially in many rural settings. So there's nice unique aspects that AD can bring. Really what we saw though was, you know, what's really required to drive on the sector is security of supply. And obviously the cooperatives are very, very well placed to act and to coordinate that security of supply. Security and clarity of regulation is very, very important as well, but also clarity from a government perspective in terms of the messaging, in terms of sending a very, very strong signal, and in terms of spelling out actually in quite some detail, what is their intent for the AD sector and how can it contribute, and how do they see it participating in a very, very active way in terms of that decarbonisation and in terms of creating that resilient rural economy. And finally, the last piece obviously that is essential for any energy project was the certainty around price, and to see the, you know, the RES scheme or comparable schemes forcefully backing AD as a very innovative and very locally specific and very sectoral specific technology that can be derived and brought to market in very different ways. So yeah, AD is I suppose, in my opinion, it's a more complex story to tell than other types of renewable energies. Therefore, it's tougher to catch the public imagination on it. What we sought to do with that report was to bring some clarity to that, and really just to drive that on. So it's very, very interesting to listen again to how that conversation is evolving, and to hear Niamh's take on how that can be driven on. So a huge area of opportunity, and we'll do what we can to continue raising that awareness.
Thank you very much, Thomas. I work myself a day a week for the International Energy Agency Biogas Task, and I lead that task. And the role of anaerobic digestion is quite interesting. And what I'm always amazed of is products that we use that we probably don't think about. So there's an anaerobic digester in Denmark, and they segregate the biogas into methane and carbon dioxide, but they sell the carbon dioxide. And there's a market in Denmark for 65,000 tons of CO2. And CO2 is used in laboratories, it's used in hospitals, it's used in the slaughter industry, it's used for putting bubbles. So they sell methane into the gas grid, they sell CO2, and they're responsible for a quarter of the Danish market. And we're also looking at methanol, and methanol is a product that we use in many, many places. And there's now a facility in Denmark that's converting biogas onto methanol, and they're going into the chemical market. And I do think the area of biorefining and going after products is really, really important, and something that we overlook. Another plant I was very impressed with is an organic farm that uses no fertilizer, no weed killer. And a problem they had was that their yield of crops deteriorates, and you get more money, but your yield goes down. So they built a digestion plant with the function of making a biofertilizer. So all their dungs and straws go in, they produce a biofertilizer. There's no weed killer. They drag 3 people along in the back of a tractor who pick up the weeds. The biofertilizer is the fertilizer. There's no chemicals, but they're now certified as greenhouse gas negative in production of milk from their cows. So I do feel that anaerobic digestion fits in somewhere. You know, you can be selling CO2, you can be selling biomethane as a transport fuel. Another area we've been looking at is there's a co-op in Switzerland that has hydroelectricity, that has PV, and it has a wind turbine, but they're selling into the market as a co-op. And what they do with the biogas is that the sun doesn't shine at night, so they store the biogas in a bag, and they're looking at the day-ahead market. So biogas is a facilitator for their co-op of renewable energy technologies. So there's, I think really what we're looking at here is the science of the leftovers. We're looking at industrial ecology. We're looking at how things can fit together. And like within the Marai Centre, one of the areas we're fascinated with is the hard to abate sectors. So I drive an electric car, but you know, I do like to see sunny climates. And if you leave this country, you're going to have to take a plane or a boat. And we've done a paper recently on, you know, how do you travel by plane, and battery won't work. I mean, if you're looking at a long distance flight, and we're looking at the area of, hydrogen from offshore wind, we're going to have lots and lots of offshore wind. But if you react that hydrogen with CO2, such as was mentioned at Indaver, you can go to methanol and you can go to kerosene. So I do think that industries and technologies have to, like a jigsaw, fit into each other and try to figure out, can we make aviation fuel? One project I'm very interested in is, if you take out Money Point and it's gone, and you stick in an electrolyzer of 1 gigawatt, you can make hydrogen from all this offshore wind. The electrical infrastructure is there. You could pass the oxygen into the Limerick cement factory. You could capture the CO2 from the cement factory and make aviation fuel. So there are things I think we should be looking at. A big electrolyzer capturing electricity that would be curtailed and constrained, and aiming to make aviation fuel at Shannon Airport. So it's, to me, this science of the leftovers and the industrial ecology, and looking at our refineries, looking at our gas network, looking at our waste management, and trying to roll things over and make things interesting. One comment that I might raise to the group, and it's the first question here, it's from Dan Boyle, and it's, while recognizing the willingness of certain industries looking towards more sustainable processes, this has to be done while putting aside that which remains unsustainable. Because a process exists, it cannot be self-described as a circular economy process. To do so is to engage in greenwashing. So I suppose I would raise a question to the group. Are we greenwashing? Any takers of that?
Yeah, maybe I'll maybe have an answer on that. I guess it depends on your outlook. I mean, we look at the problem that exists with waste and residual waste. So there's a room for waste to energy in the absence of another tried, tested technology for dealing with that problem on a large scale. So I guess it's not greenwashing in that it's a problem that exists. Other processes have failed to deal with that residual waste problem, and waste to energy continues to find more innovative ways of generating energy and reusing that energy in order to close that loop, and also for the materials that are left over, whether it's bottom ash that will go for recycling and reuse as we do in Belgium, making roads from it, or whether it's the flue gas cleaning residues which go to backfill salt mines. So they're all recovery processes. So I guess in principle I wouldn't agree.
Maybe the food and beverage industry, which I have a great interest in. We do a lot of work with Pernod Ricard, and we're looking at the distillery. I mean, if you're looking at Irish Distillery, which is one of the, I think it's the 4th largest whiskey producer on the planet. I'm quite fond of whiskey. It's a nice product, but they're averaging 36 megawatts of gas per hour to evaporate alcohol from stillage. Like, how do we move our food and beverage off gas? And we have looked at electrification. We would need greatly to upgrade the electrical infrastructure down to Middleton. But Enda, could you talk about electrification of the cheese facility, for example?
Yeah, I suppose like we've looked at it, Jerry, right? And I think you touched on it in your introduction. We're I suppose just our process is very much around heat. And you look at it, and I'm not the expert here, but you look at the efficiencies of trying to generate heat. And gas is a better way of doing that compared to electricity. Like we've looked at electrification of our processes, and from a number of aspects, Jerry, it just doesn't stack up. I mean, we firmly believe that biomethane is the way to go. Like the cost, number one, is just at the moment astronomical, very, very expensive. And we have, like I said, we have looked at all the efficiencies, and we have, I suppose, decarbonized our electrification. We're procuring green electricity for the last 3 years. But certainly right now, Jerry, where we sit and when we've looked at it, we're kind of convinced that biomethane is the way to go.
And I think if I can add to that there, Enda, I suppose Enda alluded earlier to a project called Project Clover. And as you say, Jerry, it's the industry who needs this. And that's why Project Clover is so fantastic, because it's an industry-led initiative incorporating our food and drink industry here in Ireland. and looking at a solution for them. As Conor said, the problem exists and we're merely just trying to find solutions. We're all trying to go the same way. We mightn't all have the same idea on how we get there, but everybody does have the same goal in mind. And Project Clover is a fantastic initiative at looking at the solutions for industry, because the industry here in Ireland needs decarbonised solutions, whether that be in the form of electrification or through the gas network, in order to remain competitive on the international market. There's talks in the future of carbon borders and carbon adjustments coming in. So for example, labelling on, for example, a pint of milk or a block of cheese could become the reality. And unless we make this available to our industry, that they have the decarbonised solutions, we won't remain competitive, and it won't be, I suppose, the real economic driver that it exists here today and the real employer that agriculture has in Ireland. All right, Jerry, I think you're on mute there.
If I move on to transport, I mean, transport is 40% of our energy, and we're looking at electric cars, which are great. But when we start looking at haulage and ships and planes, it does lend itself to liquid fuel. So Niamh, there's a question here about a blend limit on hydrogenated vegetable oil. Is there a 40% blend limit?
No, so no, there isn't any limit on 40%. Might be is in line with the current diesel specification that is in use in Europe, where you would run into maybe a density limitation when you blend greater than 40%. But there's many other diesel specifications for the use of paraffinic fuel, which is what HVO is, or renewable diesel is. So no, there's no limit. 100% HVO can be used, just under a different standard.
And continuing on, Niamh, how energy intensive is the refining process itself? Is there an industrial measure on how effective this is as a 100% scenario? Could it be considered more green when considering transmission and distribution losses? So how if you take the parasitic demand of the process, like how much greenhouse gas savings can you affect as compared to a diesel? And I may ask as well about air quality. I mean, if you are burning a HVO, how does that compare with diesel in terms of PM10, PM particulate matter?
Yeah, so in terms of just energy intensive nature of the processing, there's a very rigorous audit procedure that is undertaken by any of the producers of renewable diesel and renewable fuels, and we must be ISCC accredited in order to produce a sustainable fuel. And so therefore the greenhouse gas intensity of the production is taken into consideration. So when we discuss a 90% reduction in greenhouse gases, we've already included the production greenhouse gases in that, and that's how the ISCC greenhouse gas calculations work. So as I say, so that's already inbuilt in the proof of sustainability documentation that we would claim. And so when we claim 90% greenhouse gas emissions, that's already taken into consideration. And what was the second part of your question, Jerry?
Air quality. I mean, there is a concept out there that we shouldn't burn anything because there's a lot of conversation about air quality. If we did have HVO in trucks instead of fossil diesel, how does it compare on an air quality perspective? Yeah, so there's been quite a lot of studies been done, and particularly over in Scandinavia by one of the biggest producers of renewable diesel, and they've done a lot of studies on fleets, and all indicators in terms of particulate matter and NOx and SOx emissions are all significantly improved with the HVO and with renewable diesel. So I would say there's a superior air emission from burning of renewable diesel. There's a question here from Jonathan Sandham about the circular model and the capital cost of micro AD. I could answer that. Within the IEA, we follow different technologies, and what I found really nice in Canada in the winter, with an average temperature of -10, an anaerobic digestion plant was put in place in 1 week. So it was built in Belgium, stuck on a ship in the middle of winter. They went from no anaerobic digester to a week later an anaerobic digester. It cost $400,000 and the herd size was, I can share that with you, but it was a small herd. And there are a number of these small digesters that can be bought from a factory. The anaerobic digestion report Cork Chamber is in the link if any of you want to read it. Sean Finnan in Irish Bioenergy Association. On behalf of members to lobby for a support mechanism for biogas and biomethane production, who is going to pay for biomethane production? Our industry going to pay the additional cost of production compared to fossil fuel? The government are reluctant to provide a support scheme. We would like to hear views of the panel. This is something that has been raised before. And again, within the IEA, we look at all the different countries and their support schemes. Germany has a very, very rigorous support scheme that is very detailed, but is rich. And Germany now has, I think, about 10,000 anaerobic digesters. One of the reasons we don't have a biogas industry in Ireland is that there is a very low level of refit. One of the things we have spoken about is like the biofuels obligation scheme has been very, very effective, as Niamh will testify, in reducing greenhouse gas emissions in this country. And it's probably been a lot more effective than EVs, but doesn't get the same amount of media. I mean, when you put your petrol and diesel in a car, Niamh might tell me it's 6 or 7% biofuel. Like, should we mandate natural gas? Should we mandate that natural gas should be 5% blend by 2025, 15% blend by 2030? Should we have a mandation scheme? Or like last night, listening to to Eamon Ryan, like, which I would totally agree with, the pen is mightier than the sword. If you say you have to have a 50% greenhouse gas reduction by 2030, and industry need to find a solution. Industry will find a solution. Like, if there is mandation of natural gas with biomethane, is this a way for the industry to get greener gas without government spending money? So I'll hand that to the panel. Maybe Niamh, would you like to talk on that?
Yeah, no, I can talk to that. So as part of the Renewable Energy Directive recast, so RED 2, Article 23, it isn't an obligation scheme, but it is a best endeavour scheme to begin introducing, in the same way as the biofuel obligation scheme, a percentage target for renewable fuels for the heat sector. So at the moment, it's a 1.3%. And again, it is a best endeavour. And I think the latest they want to see member states utilising this is by 2026. But I feel, and I suppose policy would probably say that having that as an obligation, correct, Jerry, would drive, I suppose, a renewable proportion, especially within the heating sector, which would be extremely beneficial. And then that cost could be socialised appropriately through that mechanism as well. So that is a future option.
We're a bit tied for time. I do apologise. I want to hand over, if I may, to Katrina Power. And Katrina works in the Southwest Circular Bioeconomy Cluster. Is Katrina online?
I am. Thank you very much, Jerry. And thanks to all the panelists for the wonderful session today. I've really learned a lot, and especially all about how we're working towards a circular economy. So hi everyone, my name is Katrina Power. I am the Education and Outreach Manager for the Circular Bioeconomy Cluster Southwest. It's a new initiative from Munster Technological University, and it was recently started only 2 months ago. And so I am now fundamentally the cluster manager. And what we are doing is we are bringing together an aiding collaboration around circular economy, working with industry, working with businesses, working with researchers and finance stakeholders as well, to help realize projects, to do market studies, to do and interesting engagements and events, networking, and working with the likes of Energy Cork Cluster as well. And so we're a new initiative, and I'm happy to engage with businesses and other stakeholders on this call today who might be interested in participating in the cluster's activities. And as I'm developing the strategy over the coming months, I'd love to hear your input on what's needed in terms of programs and projects for the Southwest region to help us realize a circular bioeconomy. I'll put my contact details in the chat as well. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Katrina. The one thing I do think is that we have a very, very interesting challenge. The next 10 years are going to be so interesting. We have to reduce emissions by 50%. And I do believe the role of industry and society is very, very important. I mean, 35% of our emissions in this country are from agriculture. We're responsible for, I think, 12% of baby formula on the planet. We have one of the biggest whiskey distilleries, one of the biggest cheese plants. And I think this challenge will be fascinating, and I'm really looking forward to it. I think the presentations today were excellent, and it shows the challenge that we do have. So I would like to thank the speakers. I found it very, very fascinating. And I'm going to hand back to Michelle. Michelle, will you finish up?
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Jerry. Absolutely, I have to agree with everything Jerry was saying there. That's been incredible insights given and perspectives, and even the overview of the different projects and efforts ongoing, you know, to evolve processes, to innovate, to meet our climate targets and what we're trying to do from, you know, and meet the challenge from a transitionary perspective as well. So really, really incredible, and thank you very much. So to formally thank our speakers there, thank you to Enda, Conor, Niamh for their time, effort and insight today. A big thank you to Professor Jerry Murphy for moderating the session and Q&A. Thanks again to Cork Chamber for sponsoring our conference over these 3 days. And as ever, thanks to Cork City Council and Cork County Council for their continuing support via the Economic Development Fund. Also, I should have mentioned as well a thank you to Thomas for your inputs there as well, and for Katrina. And great to hear about the new cluster that's taken shape now in the Southwest as well. So it's all about the collaboration and what we can do together to move forward. So we're looking forward to tomorrow's session, and we hope that you can join us for that session, the circular economy in practice. So looking at buildings, transport and heat, featuring our moderator, Val Cummins of Simply Blue Energy, Kinsale, Donna Gartland of Codima, Niall Crossan, Ecological Building Solutions, Mario Pagliaro, CNR, Italy's Research Council, and Kieran Gallagher of ESB. So thanks everyone for tuning in such great numbers too, and engaging in the discussion. If you have any feedback whatsoever on the event or want to learn more about becoming a member of Energy Cork, don't hesitate to contact us. And just to say, see you tomorrow and have a good afternoon. Thank you.